Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It's the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith, this is your opportunity to get those questions answered. Here is our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Hey, you can also shoot us an email if you prefer that, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. We also have Ryan Penny standing by to take those phone calls that you are certainly pondering right about now. Also, we have Jeff Burson on social media. He'll be glad to post any questions that you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook Live, because we're streaming there right now. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm great. How was your long weekend, sir?
You know, it was very enjoyable. Among other things, I took a really lengthy bike ride, which I love to do. Throw the headphones on, get some music or podcasts, get out, just lose myself in nature and sound and motion. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know, I was on the bike this morning, the exercise bike in my case. I put on a TV show that I had never seen, and I thought, man, this thing is awful. So I wound up watching the first 2 episodes of Batman from the 1960s, which was fantastic. Oh, love it. Love it. So we're going to lead off with two very interesting questions here. This first one from George, who says, since Jesus is the God-man, and therefore fully human, he must have had 46 chromosomes. I believe it is church teaching that 23 of those chromosomes came from Mary's DNA. That is, Mary actually contributed to Jesus' biological makeup, such that some of Jesus' physical features may have resembled Mary's. Regarding Jesus' other 23 chromosomes that did not come from Mary, is it church teaching that those came from the usual male cell needed for procreation, albeit from a miraculous process in the incarnation? In other words, did Mary's female cell literally unite with a male cell to create Jesus the God-man? I know this is really out there, but I'm totally curious about this. Thank you, George.
Yeah, thanks. So the dogma on the conception of Christ predates, of course, our modern knowledge of embryology and genetics, and is not framed in those terms. It is not framed in terms of chromosomes and so forth. And so this becomes a matter of theological speculation as to how precisely the virgin birth took place. I mean, how metaphysically did that happen? And I don't have an answer to the question, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that the dogmatic theologians might speculate about. I guarantee if Thomas were around today, he would have a couple articles in the Summa exactly on that with pros and cons, and he'd lay out all the genetics and go through all the data and come up with a hypothesis.
Yeah.
And there are probably some Mariologists who have done that. I'm just not familiar with any explicit teaching on it. So what we do know is that Christ would have had normal human chromosomes. Otherwise, he would not have been a human person.
Sure.
Right? How he got them all in place, that's a mystery.
Okay. And that's where we got to leave it. George, thank you so much for your email. Just heard from Caesar watching us on Facebook today. Caesar says, what is the difference between meeting Jesus Christ in one's own particular judgment to that of entering into beatific vision?
Yeah, thanks. So meeting Jesus in one's own particular judgment is as different from entering the beatific vision as meeting the bouncer at the door is to actually being allowed in the party. Okay? Everyone will meet Christ in the particular judgment. not everyone will be admitted to the beatific vision. All right. The particular judgment is simply where you are judged in your soul for the deeds that you have done in the body, whether good or bad, and your fate will be made known to you. But the reward of the just is that we will enter into an experience the church calls the beatific vision. St. Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians 13, when we will know God fully, even as we're fully known.
Okay.
Now, that full knowledge in God will not be just sensory knowledge. We won't actually have senses immediately until the resurrection. So we're not going to see God with physical eyes, or hear him with ears, or smell him, or taste him, or touch him. Rather, it'll be an immediate, intuitive knowledge of God in his essence. And what will that be like? Well, I mean, we know a few things about it. So there are some things that I seem to know intuitively without any prior sense knowledge, like knowledge of the contents of my own intellection, like knowledge that I exist, for example, is the kind of thing that you're not going to be able to show me a film that proves me otherwise. Right? I mean, I know it. I'm there. Here I am, right? Once you explain to me the terms and principles of arithmetic, I just know that 2 + 2 = 4, and I can't unknow it. I mean, that's intuitive knowledge, right? And so we'll know God that way. We're going to just know God in his essence, in an immediate intuitive vision. And we'll know God as the highest good and the source of all goodness and truth and beauty. Mm-hmm. And now we can abstract that doctrine by, we can consider the material world, recognize its dependence on a first cause, and then we can deduce that all of those attributes have to pre-exist in God in an immanent way. But we'll actually know that in an immediate realization, in such a way that it'll completely satisfy all of our longing and leave literally nothing to be desired. It'll be an experience of absolute, unutterable, and infinite bliss.
All right. Well, we do appreciate that, and thank you so much for your question, Caesar. By the way, if you want to pose a question via Facebook, just like Caesar did, you can just put that in the comments section when you are listening to us on either Facebook Live or YouTube. It's real simple, and then as soon as Jeff sees that, he'll pass that on to us here in the studio. All right. And when we come back from our quick break here, we're going to be talking with Charlie in Detroit, who is listening right now on the great Ave Maria Radio, a first-time caller. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to hearing from you as well. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Normally at this time I'd be saying the Monday edition of Call to Communion, but hey, it's Tuesday. Happy Labor Day, a little late there. So it is the Tuesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
On the next Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo.
We do our very best at Catholic Connection to keep you connected to the Church with interviews on issues that matter, issues that impact our everyday lives as Catholics in the world, but not of the world. Whether it's featuring the latest from the front lines of the pro-life movement or the culture war that continues to rage around us, we will give you the tools to help you stay faithful as well as make a difference.
Catholic Connection, weekday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
The Reason for Our Hope with Father Larry Richards.
Every day of my life since I was 17 years old, I've spent an hour a day minimum with the God of the universe. I would die for him, that which I'm most afraid of. I would die for him in an instant because he's the most important thing in my life. I know him. And see, that's what it ultimately comes down to. What about you? Where are you at with this God? Because that's the ultimate question. Does God exist? Doesn't he exist? Is Christ God? Isn't he God? Is there life after death? Is there not? Is this all a waste of time, or is this all for a purpose? What's the purpose of life? And so in the Catholic Church, the Church has taught us from the beginning. Who made me? God made me. Why did God make me? God made me to know him, love him, and serve him in this world so I can be happy with him forever in the next. The first purpose of life is to know God.
Tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Tracy Sable, Pope Francis is going to be signing his third encyclical later this month. We'll have a report on that. Also, the Biden campaign continues to court the Catholic vote. Well, what is the Catholic vote? We're Going to talk about that and lots more tonight on EWTN News Nightly with Tracy Sable. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television. All right, if you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Charlie in Detroit, listening on the great Ave Maria Radio, a first-time caller. Hey, Charlie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thank you, guys. I listen to the show often, and I'm having a little trouble. I would be considered a revert to the church.
Mm-hmm.
And while I think that's true, I also would probably be categorized as a conservative or orthodox Christian, coming from an evangelical background and looking to return to the church. My stumbling blocks are not typical. I don't have trouble with Mary. I don't have trouble with a pope. I have trouble with this pope. And I'm trying to figure out how to separate that. I've had good friends try to counsel me and say things like, well, there have been good popes and bad popes. And while I think that's a little too glib and shooting from the hip, I do have concerns about things that I, peeking in the window and studying, would not consider orthodox, and at the very least maybe just not bringing clarity to places that I thought there would be clarity as I sought my way back to the church. How do I separate the issue of returning to the church and then seeing things like the Amazonian Synod and what appears to be earth worship, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, yeah, I really appreciate the question. So first of all, your friend's counsel to you that you dismissed as glib, I think is not as shallow as you think it might be, right? In other words, we recognize that the papacy is a divine institution. It's part of the constitution of the church as founded by Christ, and that every pope is the legitimate successor to St. Peter and has authority, juridical authority, doctrinal authority, and can legislate and teach the faith and rule the church, and does so for the benefit of the church. But it's also true, going all the way back to St. Peter, that popes have done heroically good jobs and heroically, well, not heroically, but egregiously bad jobs at fulfilling that office. And St. Paul himself talks about this dynamic in, especially in 2 Corinthians, when he says, how are men to regard us? And he's really talking about apostles. He says, as servants of Christ, entrusted with the message of salvation. But what prompts his reflection is the fact that he's being evaluated, right, by the Corinthians and others. And he always had to prove his apostleship. And he says, I don't really care if you judge me, because it's the Lord who judges me, right? And we will have to give an account for the ministry that we have done, we apostles. And he recognizes that, I mean, this is, 1 Corinthians 3, when he talks about some apostles have done a good job building, others bad, and at the end, the work that they do is going to be tested by fire, and some people will escape as only through flames. And I really think in the context there, he's talking about apostles, right, who have built churches, and some have built them well, and some have built them badly.
Mm-hmm.
And when their work is burnt up, they're just going to kind of get out with their lives, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty stark assessment on the nature of the apostolic office, and a recognition of the human element in pastoral ministry. And he tells us, like, the popes, bishops, priests will answer to God for the work of their ministry, whether they do it well or badly, and you can do it well or badly. Now, so we should always have that kind of reserved judgment, an orthodox, sound appreciation for the institution of both of the episcopacy and the papacy and the priesthood as integral to the constitution of the church, but a recognition that the office holders are mere men who will be held accountable to God for the work that they do, and not to be involved in a kind of cult of personality that says, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow John Paul II, I follow Francis, I follow Benedict, I follow, Pius. No, we follow Christ, who built the church and gave it this particular constitution, right? And we're saved through our faith in Christ and the life of virtue by cooperating with the graces given to us in the sacraments. And I'm going to come to the current pontiff in a moment, but I want to just get more of the big picture out. A guide to me in thinking about the papacy as an office in the church has always been Cardinal Newman, St. John Henry Cardinal Newman, who in the 19th century was widely regarded by his peers as a kind of liberal, And although he regarded himself as kind of an Orthodox arch-conservative, and so it's kind of a weird way that worked out in the PR of Cardinal Newman. But he had a huge problem with Pius IX, who is, widely regarded as kind of one of your arch-conservative popes. He had a big old problem with Pius IX because he thought that Pius IX was really authoritarian in the way he did business. And then he objected strongly when Pope Pius called the First Vatican Council. He thought it was just a bad idea, and it was just an egregiously bad policy move in the church. And he believed the dogma when the council defined the dogma of papal infallibility. Newman believed it, but he thought it shouldn't have been defined. He was what you call an inopportunist. He thought it was not opportune to define the dogma. And I always found that a really interesting perspective, that he could recognize the Pope's authority, recognize the truth of the dogma that the Pope pushed to have defined, and yet also regard it as imprudent to have done so.
Compartmentalizing.
And that gives you a lot of space in your thinking, not just with a pope, but with a bishop, a priest. When I go to Mass, this is a concrete example. When I go to Mass, Father says a homily. Father lays down a policy about how we're going to handle the Thursday night Bible study, whatever it is. It is a perfectly Catholic attitude to say, I don't think that was a good idea. I think it was a bad call. But you know what? He's the priest. He gets to make the call, right? I can think all day long that it was a bad idea. I don't have to surrender my intellect or my will or my affections and worship the ground the man walks on, but I do have to recognize his legitimate authority. And that's always true in every age, no matter who the ordinary is, no matter who the priest is, no matter who the pope is. All right, now, that being said, let me say a word or two about Pope Francis, the Holy Father, who is my pope, who I love, and who guides me and teaches me, and who I appreciate, and whose pastoral initiatives I have found to be consoling and inspiring. The Pope has done, I think, a wonderful job of drawing the Church's attention to some specific issues that needed attention. I think that the Pope's apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, on the joy of the gospel, where he calls for dioceses and parishes to reflect on the way they're doing pastoral ministry and be willing to shake up the status quo in ways that serve the apostolate and the annunciation that Christ is Lord and that he comes to save us, to put the kerygma first and be willing to think through the way we do business in the Catholic Church. And he gives concrete application to that exhortation. I find that to be just tremendously helpful. As somebody who works in diocesan machinery and has been, in kind of the thick of the Catholic life for a long time, I recognize that we're not always efficient in the way we do business. And a pope that's willing to address that, is fantastic. A lot of what Pope Francis has said and done that many people who would consider themselves ideologically on the right find difficult, I find echoed almost word for word in the teaching of Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict. And not to say John 23rd and Paul VI as well. I mean, I find there's an awful lot of continuity in recent pontificates. What I find different is that Pope Francis has a vastly different pastoral style. And, he's the first pope in a while who hasn't been a professional theologian or philosopher. And, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when Benedict became pope because, I'm a theologian or wannabe, and I'm really motivated by exegesis and the study of texts. And, this is how I came to faith. And so, we looked at Ratzinger and we're like, oh man, he's one of us. He's an exegete. He's a philosopher. He's a theologian. He's a theologian's theologian.
Kindred spirit.
This is going to be great. And then I found out that absolutely nobody outside the circle of people who like professional theology actually read the man, right? That was his style. It was very attractive to people like me who are into texts. Didn't speak to a lot of people because a lot of people aren't into texts. John Paul II was a professional philosopher and a deep intellectual. And so these guys were heavily oriented towards being really, really specific in their use of language and to, hammer out those definitions with just scintillating clarity. And for us logic chopping metaphysical types, that's really attractive. That's not the way Francis is put together. And he'd be the first to tell you that that's not his way. That's not his mode. He wasn't a professional theologian or philosopher, and he's not oriented towards those kinds of scholastic definitions. And so sometimes his use of language is evocative, and his gestures are evocative in a way that people who are accustomed to that mode of leadership find unsettling. And I understand what you're saying, all right? And I know where you're coming from. But I think if you back away from the style of pastoral leadership and then try to place his theological agenda in the larger context of not only pontifical theology but magisterial teaching, including Second Vatican Council, you'll find a lot more continuity and commonality than you might at first be tempted to. And I think that we need to approach our pastors and our fellow Catholics with a hermeneutic of charity. And not, coming out of evangelicalism, you did, I did as well, we are hardwired to think apocalyptically and ideologically in us and them categories about, we're the good team and these other people are the bad team, and we're going to draw the proper metaphysical and scholastic distinctions to define the battle lines. And we're going to set up a number of shibboleths, a number of symbols. They could be devotional, they could be ideational, they could be doctrinal, they could be moral. And if you check the box on all the right shibboleths, you're on the good team. And I don't think that's a helpful way to be Catholic, right? And it's a temptation, and it's really kind of what Pope Francis has criticized as the neo-Gnosticism, right? I'm going to lay out a set of intellectual categories, and this is going to be my standard of what it means to be a good Catholic. In front of me right now on the computer in the radio studio, I have a copy of St. John Climacus's Ladder of Ascent, which is a great Byzantine monastic spiritual treatise on the Christian life.
Uh-huh.
And like so much classic Catholic literature, you will not find Climacus giving a fig for ideological divisions within the Church in his definition of what it means to ascend this ladder to God. But it's all focused on the development of the life of virtue. And of course that's the heart and soul of the matter, right? And popes come and go, bishops come and go, priests come and go, theological fads come and go. But Christ is forever, and he calls us ultimately to imitate his character and live the Beatitudes as our path to heaven.
Charlie, thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion here on EWTN. Josh watching us right now on YouTube. Josh says, many reformed theologians claim that Rome did not have a monarchical bishop in the first century, and that Irenaeus was a bad historian. What would be a good response to this?
Yeah, actually, we have a great article. It's about 100 pages long. It's almost a little mini book, okay, at the Call to Communion website on precisely this topic. It had several authors. Brian Cross is one of them. And and I mention it because it specifically engages Reformed theologians who have made this case from a higher critical examination of patristic texts, all right? And it goes into a sort of pedantic level of detail that is beyond what I can do on this show. And it is, what is it called? It's the bishops, the papacy and the bishops of Rome, or monarchical papacy and the bishops of Rome. I can't think, the titles escaped me, but Bishops of Rome is in the title, and Brian Cross is one of the authors.
Okay.
So I'd strongly recommend looking at that text. But in a nutshell, look, you're in similar ground here with higher critical analysis of scriptural texts. I mean, we have evidence for the doctrine of the papacy and monarchical episcopacy in the 2nd century. And the most salient evidence, of course, is from Ignatius of Antioch, who's very explicit in his teaching of monarchical episcopacy. And what the critics do is they just say, well, Antioch was an exception, or Ignatius was an exception, and here are these other models of episcopal government that were collegial and presbyteral and so forth. And so there's more than one way to read the data, right? I mean, there's a perfectly coherent, textually sound way to read that data, in light of the Catholic Church's teaching on the priesthood and the episcopacy. And then there's a higher critical way of reading it that has a different theory. And both of them can be reconciled with the empirical data, right? And so ultimately, we're in a similar situation to the text of the Bible. I mean, you can look at the Scriptures higher critically and make a case that these things did not happen, or that these are just constructions by the apostles to advance an ideological position, or you can treat them as authoritative and reliable, and your motives for doing so have to be related to the larger case of the motives of credibility and can't be reduced to exegesis.
And that's where we're going to leave that one. Thank you so much for your question there via YouTube, Josh. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. In a moment, we're going to be talking with Joe in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We'll also talk with Andrew in Jefferson City and a few others here. We've got a couple lines open for you right now if you want to give us a call at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-EWTN for EWTN's Call to Communion. Love to hear from you today, especially if you're a non-Catholic thinking about becoming a Catholic, but there's this one thing that's bothering you. Call now, 833-288-EWTN.
The Venerable Fulton John Sheen.
If we wish to keep our rights and liberties, we must also keep our God. Piety and patriotism go together. That's the first glory of being an American.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Hello, family. Our world has been turned upside down by the coronavirus pandemic. Concern for our loved ones, economic uncertainty, and of course, social distancing. It's easy to understand why there's such great anxiety and fear in the world. I'm convinced that God is using this moment to bring us closer to Him and to strip away the distractions of our normal daily lives, and that He is calling us to place our trust in Him. In this difficult moment, EWTN is a great spiritual resource that can help you, your family, and friends make sense of the chaos. Of course, EWTN is where you can turn for Mass every day. In addition to our television and radio channels, you can also find the Mass, live Eucharistic adoration, the Rosary, and other devotions on our web and video on-demand platforms. And of course, EWTN News will continue to provide you with the latest updates on the pandemic, as well as other current events around the world from a Catholic perspective. Please know that we're praying for you, and let's also join together in prayer for our EWTN family around the world. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Now there's a fast and easy way to get in touch with EWTN. The EWTN Everything number. Call 1-800-447-EWTN to get the latest information on programming, special events, pilgrimages, and more. Our EWTN Family Viewer Services representatives are ready to help you with whatever your needs may be. The EWTN Everything number. 1-800-447-EWTN. EWTN.
Tomorrow on More to Life, what do you want?
Do you feel like other people aren't respecting your needs or wants? We'll help you be heard.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now, back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
We're back, and we are Called to Communion here on EWTN. We have two lines open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. During the break, David got onto calltocommunion.com, came to find out that he got the title of the article totally wrong.
Yeah,
right?
I recommended an article for this fellow, but the correct title is The Bishops of History in the Catholic Faith.
Okay.
I had said Bishops of Rome, but it's Bishops of History in Catholic Faith, and it's a quite lengthy article addressing the exact concern that he raised.
Very good. Back to the phones right now at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Andrew in Jefferson City, Missouri, listening on Covenant Radio. Andrew, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom, and hi, Dr. Anders. Thank you for taking my call today. God bless you guys, especially on this birthday of our Blessed Mother.
Yes.
That happens to be my birthday also, so that's pretty nice.
Happy birthday, Andrew.
Well, thank you. So my call today is my wife and I have just celebrated a year anniversary, and just about 2 months ago we found out that we are pregnant with our first child. And that's as a blessing coming from our natural family planning that we've done after we got married, and something we had been discussing. It's been a particularly rough pregnancy with her having a lot of morning sickness and stuff like that. And the other day we got to talking about future children. And as she's a Protestant, and as a Catholic marriage, it's, we have to remain open to life. And the other day we were discussing future children, and she was saying that after she has, possible 2 children, she's thought about getting a tubal ligation done. And this is kind of coming as a shock to me, because in the past we discussed having, always remaining open to life. And I don't know if this is just coming as a result of her having a particularly rough pregnancy or what, but, we kind of got into it a little bit, and, we decided that this is just something, this being just our first pregnancy and this being way down the road, we'll discuss this at a later point in time. And I have absolutely zero idea how to talk to her about this.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, first of all, I don't think you can talk to her about this without addressing in your own life and in your own relationship to her the question, and I'm not talking about the intellectual question, I'm talking the lived expression of marital chastity and the virtue of self-restraint, right? And love. And so the more any couple instrumentalizes the sex act as a way to gratify passion, or to try to sort of reignite what was lost in human communication, or overly romanticizes the sexual act, this kind of thing, in a way that would leave either person in the marriage being somehow devalued and dehumanized and taken advantage of, or reduced to a commodity of some kind. And other ways that husbands and wives may treat each other badly in the course of their life. I mean, we can objectify each other not only in the sexual domain, but we can be maybe perfectly attentive to one another in the sexual area, and then be utterly dismissive in other areas of our life, where we end up fighting about money, or we fight about who's going to pick the kids up, or or what color we're going to paint the bathroom, or whatever it might be, right? The more the whole marriage is characterized by loving attention and self-sacrifice and purity and gentleness and forgiveness and patience and a willingness to forgive past faults and not remember all those things that St. Paul tells us to do in 1 Corinthians 13 that characterize the life of love. The more the relationship is characterized that way, then the more natural the Church's teaching on the nature and ends of procreation will seem when presented at the intellectual level, right? I mean, I remember early in my own life when I was exploring the Catholic faith and not yet Catholic, and I explained to my then Protestant wife what the Catholic Church taught about birth control. I mean, quite honestly, her initial response was to think this was kind of almost like a theological fetish, in a way, a different way, kind of an abstract theological way of objectifying her and not regarding her body and her needs. And she's not the only Catholic woman or non-Catholic woman who's ever responded to the Church's teaching in that way, because they see the thing abstracted from the life of virtuous self-sacrificial love that it's supposed to be the expression and emblem of, not the means to try to coerce into. In other words, I can't switch to natural family planning and hope that by this magic pill, I will solve the other relational problems in my marriage. In fact, a marriage that's otherwise wounded in the psychological or moral sphere will have a very difficult time living this teaching. But one that's characterized by love and tenderness and self-sacrifice, it'll be much easier. And so that's my first mode, is like you've got a little bit of a breather. Maybe even a couple years before you have to revisit this question again. So from now till then, the most important thing to do is, how can I develop those virtues in my marriage that natural family planning is meant to be an expression of, so that it doesn't seem grossly out of place with the rest of our life. And that'll also include, the virtue of marital chastity. And St. Paul says, it's important that we not come together at times and give ourselves to prayer and practice that kind of asceticism. So that's really important. And then there are some things in the intellectual level. It also, the understanding the teaching, the church's teaching on contraception, and we do this. We follow the church's teaching because we're trying to achieve a certain kind of marital friendship that's ordered to the spiritual. And asceticism and contemplation are integral to that. And that's our primary mode of sharing and communicating in the faith, right? Is this kind of spiritual commitment to one another. And as such, the mutual self-donation in the sexual act for the purpose of raising a children is therefore integral to a vision of what it means to be a family, namely being a family, raising up children to go to the kingdom of heaven, not abstracting the sex act from that much wider transcendent vision of Christian marriage. And then also, I don't want to treat you like a sex object. And then kind of the final straw is to do otherwise will violate my own conscience.
Okay. Andrew, thank you so much for your call. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. And while we're on the subject of life issues, we did receive a text here from, let's see, let me scroll to it. It's Kate watching us today on YouTube, David. Kate says, I need to make my first confession, but I'm having a hard time being sorry for my husband's vasectomy. I'm still relieved to not get pregnant again. How can I overcome this?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So sorrow does not have to be a bodily emotion in order for you to be legitimately contrite. And, I think that we've all done things in the past that we regret, that we recognize were objectively wrong. And yet it's impossible to think back on those past events without the memory of the pleasure itself that motivated them being pleasurable. You think back on your past indiscretions and you're like, I shouldn't have done that, but gosh, it was a good time, right? I mean, that's a natural response.
Yeah, it is.
And you don't have to, in order to have contrition, you don't have to look back and try to make yourself feel something that you don't feel or didn't feel, right? Contrition is an act of the will, right? Guided by intellect that says, this was objectively the wrong way to go. And I will not to do it again. Like I'm determined not to do that again. Now, part of growing in spiritual maturity and moral maturity is that I recognize that at present I'm not in a place where my affections, my emotions, register the truth of this teaching. Like my emotional life is someplace completely different. It says I want to do those things. All right. My intellectual life tells me I ought not to feel that way. Yeah. So I trust that by making an act of contrition, by being absolved, by receiving grace in the sacrament, and then purposing to live a Catholic life over time and practice the disciplines, that I'll come to a deeper realization that will include my embodied emotions about these intellectual truths that the church presents to me. And give yourself time.
There you go. Kate, thank you so much for checking in via YouTube today. It's Called to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Joe now in Scranton, PA, listening on JMJ Catholic Radio, longtime partner of ours. Hello, Joe. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon. I was listening to the program, and one of the commercials was about the purpose of life, and the guy talking said that the purpose of life was to know, love, and serve God, with the foremost being to know. And I thought to myself, I had recently read a catechism-type book when the first sentence was, God was primarily, above all else, a mystery. So if the primary purpose is to know him, and he's more than anything else a mystery, how well can we really know him?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So it's a great question, and it's got a very profound and deep answer, and I'm not going to be able to even begin to do justice to it, but I'll give you a few things to go on. First of all, I can know God remotely as the first cause, right? And when a private investigator or a criminal investigator goes to the scene of a crime, and he finds bullet casings, he doesn't know the criminal who committed the crime directly, but he does know something about this criminal indirectly. Oh, this is how he did the crime. He used this particular kind of bullet in this kind of gun, and I know he's the kind of guy that would do that, right? And he begins to narrow down the picture, and other evidences show up, and you begin to build a profile, right? And something analogous happens in our relationship with God, that when I look around at the world, I notice about all the things of my experience that they have certain qualities in common with one another. And the most salient quality is that none of them created themselves and none of them sustain themselves, but they all exist in dependence on deeper and deeper elements of reality. And physics and chemistry alone are not sufficient to account for them, because physics and chemistry stand in dependence on deeper and deeper elements of reality. And physics and chemistry themselves testify to that about themselves, right? From an initial singularity, if you believe that theory. And so at the back of the whole story, there lies something of unimaginable power and glory and beauty, in which is grounded the being of all finite beings. And I don't yet know what that something is, but I know that it is. I don't know what it is, but I know that it is. And I do know some of its properties, namely truth, goodness, beauty, and an unfathomable power, and eternity. I know that it's unchangeable, because changeable things are changeable insofar as they are dependent upon causes. But if this stands at the back of the whole show, it itself is not the product of a series of causal events. And so it's not changeable. Therefore, it's also eternal. And it can't possibly be material, because material things are changeable, and they are temporal, and they are caused. So do I still know what it is? No, but I'm beginning to get a profile. I'm beginning to get a profile, okay? Then I here's a really amazing thing. I turn and look within. I look in myself, and I say, is there anything about me that resonates with that first cause, that reflects or analogizes or resembles or is like that first cause in a way that distinguishes me from other things that exist, like rocks or trees or houseplants or dogs? And I say, yes, there is. There's something in me that's immaterial and not entirely unchanging, but it's transcendent. Because it's not limited to this or that, but it takes in and can absorb and assimilate absolute truth, absolute goodness, absolute beauty. It's the immaterial soul by which I can know and love and have this capacity for transcendence. It's a likeness, if you will. It's not an identity, but it's a likeness to that first cause. And then I recognize that I can achieve a kind of inner unity in my intellectual and moral life that more or less resembles that first cause, right? As I am open to growth in wisdom and charity, right, that have their origin in that first cause. And so I can begin to draw closer by growing in wisdom and charity. Now, what the Catholic faith teaches is exactly that. It says that we actually don't know God in himself. We don't have first-hand knowledge of God. We have knowledge of God by his effects. And the most imminent of those effects is his creation of his own likeness and image in us. And the path to deeper and deeper realization of God is growth in wisdom and charity. Christ is the path to growth in wisdom and charity. The saints are its proof. And the promise, the reward held out for us after the resurrection or in the beatific vision, is that one day we will know God face to face if we have cooperated with his grace and grown in wisdom and charity.
Joe, thank you so much for your call. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Well, as you probably know by now, we offer the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass here on EWTN, live every day at 8 a.m. Eastern on EWTN radio and television. Now, to be sure you don't miss out, we can send a link to your email inbox every day. Find out more about that by going to EWTN.com. Just click on the word subscribe. It'll take you to a page where you can subscribe to the Mass, to EWTN News, all sorts of different things. Again, EWTN.com, and then click on subscribe. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Patricia now in Orlando, listening on the EWTN app. Hey, Patricia, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom and Dr. Anders. Thank you so much. I was calling because I just left a giving blood and talking to a really nice Christian woman. And she mentioned something about her sister dealt with an infidelity by her husband. And, she said, well, but since her sister was the one that was, offended, and the offense happened to her, she was free to decide whether or not she forgave or not. It's biblical. And I wanted to come back with, well, hold on, what about Jesus saying, or Peter asking how many times should we forgive our brother, and the merciful side of God that we need to fulfill, or imitate, So my question is she, reiterated that's what the Bible says, that, that person who's the offense that has been done to, they're free to either forgive or not and move on. Is that a Protestant interpretation of Matthew chapter 5?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So this very question, is the key difference in Protestant and Catholic doctrine on marriage going back to the 16th century. The exegesis of Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, how the church understands those texts and what it means in cases of adultery, is precisely the major issue, that and sacramentality, at issue between Protestants and Catholics. And it is significant that the first Christian divorce in history took place in Calvinist Geneva in the 1500s. John Calvin legitimated divorce for Christians whose spouses had been unfaithful. And that remains a dogmatic teaching of Protestantism to this day. The Catholic Church has always taken the other point of view that Christian marriage is indissoluble until death, no exceptions. And we'll deal with Matthew 5 and Matthew 19 in a moment. And so if you are lawfully married as a Catholic, that's it. You're done. No more. Only the death of the spouse can free you to take another spouse. Now, that being said, the Church's pastoral application of that teaching is more nuanced, and I need to talk about the nuance. Under normal circumstances, Catholic married couples are obligated to maintain conjugal living. You must live with your spouse. You're supposed to live together. You're there for one another. You can't really realize the goods and ends of marriage if you're not living together. All right? Got to stay together. There are exceptions to that rule. Here's one of the exceptions. Your spouse comes home with a gun and says, "I'm going to kill you." Well, you don't have to stand there and get shot. You call the cops. Have the cops come haul that guy off and put him in jail. You're not living with him then. You can run away if he's coming after you. Here's another exception. Let's say he comes home and he's carrying, 2 bags of drugs. And he says, "I'm going to plop down here on the kitchen floor and do my drugs in front of the kids." You say, "The heck you are, buddy." And you call the cops and get him hauled off, or you run away, or you take the children and you get out of there, because that is a devastatingly dangerous moral situation for the children. Here's another one. He comes home and says, "Well, y'all can't do that Catholic thing anymore. I'm tired of that. We're done with the Catholic thing. Y'all got to come, join the First Church of Burrito with me." You don't have to do that. No, we married under these terms. This is how we're going to be. This is how the kids are going to be raised. You're not willing to maintain conjugal living with me on those grounds? I'm sorry, we cannot cohabitate. It's morally dangerous to me and the children if we don't let us practice our Catholic faith. There are other defeaters, if you will. There are other conditions. Here's the one that's very relevant. He has a girlfriend. He runs off, leaves his wife, runs around with a girlfriend. The Catholic faith says if they're validly married, she can't divorce him. Well, I take that back. Let me stop. She can't divorce him and go marry somebody else.
Okay.
All right. She can't divorce him and go marry somebody. She's not free because she's validly married to him.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Catholic faith teaches she does not have to forgive him. That's actually what it says in the Code of Canon Law. She doesn't have to forgive him if forgiveness entails resuming normal marital relations. And you can see why, right? Because for some women, most women, all women, I think, your husband cheats on you. The idea of sharing a bed with a man who would violate the integrity of marriage in that way is so abhorrent and so reprehensible that it's just unfathomable to say The wounded, victimized person has to surrender this and let the other person off the hook in that kind of intimate way is too much to insist. It's beyond humanity to insist on that. Now, can she forgive? Is she permitted to forgive and welcome him back home? Yes, the church says that's preferable. If she's willing to live with him, is preferable. And in fact, for purposes of canon law, if she welcomes him back into her bed and they resume natural conjugal relations, forgiveness at that point is presumed, and they can't lawfully refuse that again. But she doesn't have to accept that kind of mode of life again if she's been violated in that way, and is permitted to seek a civil divorce for protection from this individual if she's been violated in that way. But it does not give her a free pass to remarry. Right? It would create a situation where they maintained separate residences and they lived apart, but they would still be validly married. Now, that is what St. Paul says. That is what Scripture says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and 7. 5, 6, and 7 really. He says that a husband and wife must not separate. But if they do, they have to remain unmarried, well, not married to anybody else, or else be reconciled. So that is the biblical teaching. And Jesus talks about this in two places, Matthew 5 and Matthew 19. In both instances, he says that Christian marriage is indissoluble, period and paragraph, for every reason, except, and he uses a Greek word here, porneia. And let's just say what that word means is very much in dispute between exegetes, Catholic and Protestant. It doesn't mean adultery, because the Greek word for adultery is mokeia. All right? And it would be consistent with Paul's usage to interpret that as meaning it's an unlawful or invalid marriage. And so there's one line of interpretation that says you can't divorce your spouse unless the marriage is found to be unlawful. That's an annulment, and then you can. All right? There's another line of interpretation that says, well, in a case of adultery you can, but it still doesn't give you a pass to remarry. And Jesus never says anything about a path to remarriage. And Paul explicitly rules out that possibility.
Okay. And Patricia, thank you so much for your call. Hope that is helpful for your friend. Let's go real quickly here to Rosie in Omaha, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Rosie, we have about a minute left. What's your question today?
Okay, real quick. What happens at the Last Judgment to the earth, the trees, the sun, the moon, everything on earth? What happens?
So St. Paul says it'll be renewed. That Christ will renew it, and that, in fact, creation itself groans in expectation, longing for the sons of God to be revealed. What will that renewal consist in? Don't know. Don't quite know what that's going to look like, but it will be renewed. So there will be a material universe. There will be plants and trees and the likes. What will they be like? Can't tell you. Not like they're like now.
Yeah, okay. And that's where we got to leave it. Rosie, I hope that's helpful for you. Thank you so much for your call today. Unfortunately, we could not get to Michael in Wilmington, Delaware, who has really a profound question. Michael, I'm hoping that you will call us back at the same time tomorrow. I promise that whenever you call, we will put you at the head of the line, and then we can get your question answered. So please do call us back tomorrow. Hey, Dr. David Anders, Fast Moving Show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tom.
We do it each and every Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio. We also bring you an encore of that same show tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday as well. And, of course, a best of a call to communion on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. We also bring you the show via podcasting, so you can subscribe to it just like you would subscribe to a magazine, or you can download it anytime, listen to it anytime. Just go to EWTNradio.net. On behalf of our fantastic team, Charles and Ryan and Jeff, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Thanks so much. See you tomorrow here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.